We're going to move now to the finance section. And the first presentation tonight is the facilities master plan update. Each month, as you know, we try to provide the Board of Education an update of the various components of the master plan. So the presentation tonight is to do that. This is compliance with strategic plan goal 4, operations, facility, and finance, and board policy 2:170 and 4:150. Making this presentation tonight is Josh. I'm not going to chew up your last name, and Mike and Jeff. How about that?
That is not his last name.
It's Cerniak.
Perfect. Yeah, good job.
Well, I didn't want to try to say it about like shoe tag or something.
So good evening, board. How are you this evening?
Excellent.
Okay. So we're going to jump right in. This evening what we want to cover with you are several items, and they're all related, but it's a combination of things that have come up that we think is important to have you be aware of. The original plan was to just talk about the timeline, but a few other items have come up which I'll bring you up to date on. We'll talk about the timeline. Josh is going to help me with that. And then we have the accessibility report that was produced for us by ACT Services. We haven't had a chance to meet with the author of that report to go through it in detail, but we have some general things. We did have a meeting with him and got some general things which we'd like to report to you this evening. And then an item came up with respect to the Husky Pups daycare facility that's housed in our building, and an issue that which we've known about, and we'll be able to propose a solution to that. And then we'll talk about what's upcoming in the future months. So that's this evening's agenda. So I'm going to just do a really brief recap of some of this. Most of this you've already heard already. Just to recap, we're breaking ground in June of 2020 with our work for both the Project 1 capital improvements and the health, life, safety. As we've earlier said, the Project 1 work will be substantially completed by August of 2022. The summer of 2023 will complete the remainder of health, life, safety, and the capital improvements that has been funneled in this body of work. So we also wanted to reiterate to you some of the impacts that we will be feeling as a district as we go through this work with a wonderful outcome. There's going to be a little bit of inconvenience between now and then. Mostly in the summertime areas with respect to summer school, summer musical, and other key uses of the facilities during the summer. So 2021 and 2022, you can see we're going to have not going to be able to have summer school here or the summer musical here, or we're still exploring other possibilities for where those could be. And in 2023, it sort of depends. There's still a tremendous amount of work that's scheduled for 2023, but we're reserving judgment on what that impact is until we're a little further along. We also have some issues with respect to, not issues, but we wanted to make people aware that the mall will be mostly inaccessible while the work on the Student Resource Center South Cafeteria is happening, because that will have to be used for construction traffic and the construction area as that South Cafeteria comes down and is demolished, and we actually have to put the new structure up. So we've outlined that. We've talked to the key folks that are impacted by that, and you can see the last bullet on this page on slide 3 with respect to the tennis courts. We're using half of the tennis courts for construction activities, and that'll be linked up with the remainder of the construction area. And then the other half of tennis courts will be available for use for both PE and also for the sports clubs. We've been working with the Park District of Oak Park to get auxiliary time, that doesn't make sense, additional time in some of the courts that are available from the Park District to accommodate practices and so forth. So that's the summary of a high level of the work. What I'm going to do now is turn it over to Josh from FGM to go through some of the more detailed pieces of the timeline. So, and we also have highlighted on that next slide when the board reporting will be done, so you'll have some sense of when we will come back to you at specific points in the process. So let me move to this slide here, and I can probably make it bigger too. So, Josh, can I turn to you, please?
Of course. Thank you, Mike. So for what this schedule really shows, this milestone schedule, is outlaying the next 24 months and the tail end of 2019. And more specifically, with regard to the 2020 capital improvements, we held the bid opening here at the school in the middle of November. And then the design and construction team will be back before you next week with a bid award recommendation for the 2020 capital improvements, which actually also does include some of the initial work that has to be done related to Project One. So some of the enabling work that has to occur as part of getting the facility ready for the demolition of the south cafeteria. And we'll go into, I would imagine, great detail next week relative to that, the specifics on the 2020 capital improvements bid results and the bid award recommendation, and then specifics on the scope of that work. And then we would propose to, and it certainly could come back before the board before July of 2020 to provide an update on construction, but that's one for the 2020 capital improvements, and given that scope of work, where it's a lot of roofing and mechanical work, things that really you don't see, but certainly have an important impact on keeping the building occupants warm and cool and dry, right? And then the duration of construction for the 2020 capital improvements, the majority of the construction would occur, as we often refer to as summer projects, during the summer months. That's not to say that the district wouldn't allow some of the contractors to execute work outside or before the summer starts, as long as it doesn't have an impact on students and faculty. And the district has done that in years past, from what we understand. And then moving forward to the Facilities Master Plan Project 1, which really a lot of the work is occurring concurrently with the 2020 capital improvements. So the design for the South Caf and SRC, which is the first component that would begin construction in June of 2020. That design is still progressing, and then we would be back in front of the board in January to give a budget update. And so really kind of all of those months marked in orange, we would either be coming back to the board to present a design update, a budget update, or both simultaneously, and or a construction update. And then bidding would occur on the South Cafeteria and SRC during those months that are highlighted in blue. And the reason for that long duration of bidding is because of the schedule that the district elected to move forward with, and the tight time frame that we have to split the documents up into phased bidding, and then the construction is phased as well. So that's why the bidding for the South Caf and SRC is occurring from February all the way until July. There's three separate major bid periods, bid packages that would be going out to the trade contractors for the construction of the South Caf and the SRC. Then moving on, I suppose before we get to the remainder of the design of Project 1, you can see highlighted in green the construction duration for the South Caf and the SRC starting June 2020 and going until December of 21. It is important for us to point out that the South Caf and SRC would be substantially complete in around October of 2021, but what those remaining months allow for is for all the punch list items to be addressed by the trade contractors and for district to move into the new spaces prior to the students occupying when they return from holiday break in January of 22. So for the second semester of that particular school year. And then last but not least, the design of the remainder of the components of Project 1 which is not only project one, but then also the capital improvements and the health and safety work that is wrapped up into all of that. And that would complete or be completed around the end of September, and then that would go out to bid. A much shorter bidding duration, because that would be essentially one comprehensive set of documents as it stands now. That's something that schedule, as we move forward in time, that may be refined. There's input that is needed from the district's construction manager on whether or not it makes the most sense to bid all of the following 3 summers at one time and locking up those contractors for a longer duration, or if it makes sense to bid only 1 summer at a time. So that's something that we'll be back to you with. And then construction occurring concurrently for the summer of '21, with still the ongoing construction for the South CAF and the SRC.
We just have this timeline because this is the close-in work that we know the most about. This will be a rolling timeline as we progress. We'll continue to tack on months at the far end of it as we have more visibility to what's actually going to happen. But we felt that as we had this fairly well locked up, we wanted to share it at another level of detail than the level we shared to date. Are there questions about this before we move on?
So 2, related to the tennis courts. You mentioned half of the courts will be used for a staging area for construction materials. So just want that clear, that there's no construction happening there.
No, it's a trailer, it's some parking for the superintendent and some of the key planners, foremen, and so forth, and access really for them to have their plans and so forth on that, in that space.
Right, and in terms of mitigating any damage to the courts from all that weight, is that?
The courts will have to be redone, which was already in our 10-year plan. What's happening as we're going through this, that 10-year plan that I shared with you, it was probably about a year ago now, initially, as we said, would happen, things are shifting around in that plan. For example, the roofing, which we weren't planning on doing, has had to move way up because of what we discovered in terms of the damage to the roof. So that was planned to be done a couple of years out, and now it's moved way forward. Some of the tennis courts were out a few years, they had to move forward. And this has been a juggling act. The alternative we had to provide space for the construction team was to get into these sports fields. And if we got into that would have a greater impact to the actual activities going on, and the cost to redo those would have been much more expensive. I mean, we looked at a number of options before choosing the tennis courts, and it's not ideal, but it was the best solution we came up with.
And so as it is, some other courts still will be in use, able to be used by the tennis programs during this, or no?
I'll say that again, sorry.
During this phase where the construction has, the presence encroaches on that, will there still be some of the courts available to use?
Yes, half of them.
Got it. So hence the need to have augmented for the community.
But there's also been some conversation with the Port District, correct?
Yep. And we actually, we've already mapped out the mode of access, how we get students there, right? Because the problem is, you're going to have an active construction area. And we've got some plans already mapped out for what fences will be put up and how we're going to basically keep the students segregated from the construction.
Thank you.
Just on the tennis courts, you said we'll have to redo the tennis courts. Do you mean resurface or rebuild entirely?
Rebuild. And that was,
just resurface them?
I'm sorry?
Did we just resurface them?
Yes, and the resurfacing did not take.
Oh.
And it was a temporary resurface anyway, as far as
You want to speak to that, Jeff?
That's correct. We did redo the surface of the tennis courts about a year ago. Unfortunately, there are some seams out there that continue to crack, and they're exposing more problems within the tennis courts. They do need to be rebuilt. It was done as a fix for the time being, knowing that in the future we're going to have to do something more major with the courts.
But we think that they're still usable now, or do they present a safety issue for our students?
Yes, they're not ideal, but they're usable.
That's correct.
Question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh.
My question is, in that time frame that you show, when are decisions made related to sustainable energy, solar, any of those kinds of decisions?
Well, we don't have that explicitly mapped out in there, but I know there's interest in that. We're actually tomorrow meeting with Gary Cooney and to talk about grants and other sources of funding. So there's a couple of aspects that I would like to overlay on this, which we're sort of taking this as an iterative process. So there's we need to talk about the sustainability portion and how that fits in. We need to talk about security. That we need to talk about accessibility. So to me, those are overlays that we know there's a lot of interest in, and that they have to be overlaid to this schedule. To your point, exactly. You know, when will those happen? I don't have the answer now, but it is absolutely on our radar. And we know we have some very specific things we know we want to do, but they're not really at a point of where we can tell you when that decision will be made. Or maybe we can about the roofing.
Well, I would add that with regards to sustainability, there are things inherent in the energy conservation code that the district is required to comply with as part of all of the work, specifically the major addition to the building, that the code now does require some pretty substantial sustainable measures when it comes to these systems going into the building, lighting, mechanical, and so I think that's worth bringing up because while those are certainly minimum requirements, over the years, the Energy Conservation Code, there used to not be an Energy Conservation Code, so the fact that there is one now, and it becomes more and more stringent, is actually a good thing. So the district absolutely can do more than the minimum, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to be meeting with 7 Generations Ahead, in addition to meeting with the utility companies comment at NICOR, because they have some programs as well that might be available to the district and applicable for this project. And then last but not least, designing the roof in such a manner where if the district decides to put a photovoltaic array, solar panel array on the roof, that it can be done so in a manner in which it doesn't damage the new roof, and that the new roof is actually designed to have that added at a later date if the district decides to do so.
The question that keeps going up for me is, where are you putting everybody? Like, so the construction starts, so next fall, where's everyone going to have lunch? Like, I just keep thinking of where
We've also worked that out. The main body of students would be in the One West gym. So the One West gym would not be available during the day, and we have to set up in the One West gym and we get their food in the North Caf and then go to the One West gym. We also have some other areas that have identified which we will beef up the seating in those areas. The balcony is one. I think the student center, that I'm less clear about that, but I know we've worked that out. We've worked out the details of that. Now the specifics down to how many tables and what's happening. We have the numbers, but we haven't worked out the specific logistics yet. But we worked out the numbers and we can feed them all. And we did a worst case scenario on a bad day where not everyone's going out to eat. So we looked at the option of changing the lunch schedule to have lunch periods and so on and so forth. There were just so many hang-ups and difficulties in doing that. It really wasn't worth it, and we weren't really gaining any. We weren't gaining that much for the complexity that we were introducing. So we basically we went, and the simplest solution was just to leave the lunch schedules the way they were and find places where the students could go and eat after they got their food.
Craig, do you have any questions?
Not yet.
Okay. I have a general question that has to do with the timeline and the phasing, and it continues to be about how we're communicating this. We're talking about tennis courts, we're talking about no summer musical, no access to the mall, and you know, the evidence has been that the more we talk about this, you know, it tends to stick better than however we communicate, whether it's email or whatever. There's always someone that says, I had no idea. So is there a way that as we're, even the things that we're sure of, I mean, we're sure that the tennis courts are, it's going to be free or whatever, that we start communicating those things out to the community?
Sure, Karen and I actually have, Karen Mosley has developed a communications plan which talks not only about the community but all of the stakeholders and what information we want to be communicating at what point to which audience. And if you'd like, you know, maybe at our next update we can present that to you so you have some sense of what we're planning to do there.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, it doesn't have to be in detail, but just so that as we're learning about this, there's an element of even these, you know, that this is going, that we're talking about where people can find this, you know, things like that.
I did yesterday email the impacts along with the videos to all the faculty and staff. We posted it on social media. It's on the website. We're going to put it in Husky Mail. I thought about doing an email about it, but honestly, we've been bombarding people with so many emails lately that I decided not to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm very aware that we need to say it repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because even this time, there's more, you know, certainty about like what parts of the building won't be able to be used or what programs. Those are the things I think parents and students and the community will be, at this point, most interested, you know, for planning purposes. You know?
Absolutely agree.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other question on timeline? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the accessibility report. So I'm going to take you through this relatively quickly. Please slow me down or stop me if you have any questions. The idea here was to try to give you a first look at something we really hadn't had a chance to digest ourselves. It's a very detailed report, and we still haven't figured out how we're going to take that detail and present it in some digestible format for the board and the community. But that's coming. We've given ourselves a couple of months to work on that. Mark Triglaff is the founder and principal of the ACT Services. I think I sent you his CV earlier. Put a little blurb in there about what they purport to do with respect to not only meet ADA standards, but exceed them when possible to make sure we provide the accessibility that we want to for our community. So that's sort of the gentleman and his organization that did this study. Some of the key things that are going to be in the study sort of setting the stage, and some of these are, yeah, we know these things, but they're important to understand. Obviously, this building is old. It's a vintage building which was never designed for accessibility, unfortunately. And in many cases, there's little that can be done with the existing facilities as they stand without remodeling them in some significant way. So because of the inherent design of the way they were put together. Another one of the observations that Mark and his team have made is that where we have made renovations, we've actually incorporated accessibility in those renovations. So that's good news. And then more good news is new capital improvements give us an opportunity as we do those improvements to improve accessibility also. So this is a key criteria we're going to be using going forward. So questions came up on what the scope of the study was, and the answer is we had Mark and his team look at the entire building, all of the fields, stadium, and tennis courts. Obviously, the remediation will take time and money. Part of what the report gives us an opportunity to do is come up with a prioritization scheme. So the way these items are typically looked at is accessibility is looked at to get into the building, right from the parking lot. What disabled parking is available to get into the building itself. And then once in the building, what access do we have? What are the paths of access into the classrooms, and obviously in the classrooms, and then other ancillary spaces such as the restrooms, locker rooms, And then finally, not least, but other items that haven't been identified in that pecking order of priorities. So on page, I'm sorry, Greg, I should be telling you the page number. I'm now on page 8. So this gives you a sample of what would be coming in the report. I'm going to just take you through the columns of this spreadsheet so you have some sense of what we're going to be looking at. Not on every item, but where it makes sense, there is a photo of the actual area that we're talking about, the location identified, the barrier that was identified. So what exactly in that space is a barrier to the accessibility. And then I'm going to let Josh tell you what those initials stand for.
Sure. So in the fourth column, the first acronym is essentially the ADA guidelines, and then the second, the IAC, is the Illinois Accessibility Code.
So that column then represents which of those two sets of codes we are in, is concerned in this particular barrier to access. So that's really the reference point of the code. Next column is a proposed solution, not necessarily the solution we will implement, but it is that team, Mark's team, in their thought process, what they feel would be a solution. In some cases, very straightforward. You don't have a handle at the right level or something like that. That's pretty easy. But some of these are going to require much more than what is stated here. This is just to give us a starting point for what a solution might be. The 1, 2, 3, 4. The priority column is just as you might imagine. This will help us by setting a priority, to set a date for when we might go after this. And I kind of skipped over who's going to do it. In most cases, it'll be the buildings and ground staff that will be responsible for it, and the projected cost. Again, I will caution you on that. This is Mark and his team, ACT Services, talking about what they think it might cost. This is just a rough estimate. We ultimately have to determine, based on what the solution is, how much it would actually cost. So but again, it's a good reference column for us to have some sense of what we think some of these accessibility solutions might be. And then importantly, the projected date, and then you have sort of an audit comment is when this is actually completed or whatever, sort of a check-off box. So this is, I think it's a good format to start with. It's not necessarily one we're going to end with. We'll probably adapt portions of it for our own use. But I think just in terms of having a roadmap, this gives us a really nice start to getting a sense of what we need to do and when we think we can get around to doing it and how much it's going to cost. So I'm going to just, any questions?
Yes.
Sure.
I continue to wonder when we talk about ADA and accessibility, are we talking about they're different things? So
Yeah.
accessibility, from what I was looking at, seems to be more about physical mobility issues when disabilities run the gamut from, I'm remembering one of the presentations when we were still in the process of approving Imagine, a gentleman that came who's legally blind and talking about those needs. And so and we've heard a lot of parents talk as well. So I don't know if they are interchangeable, but we seem to be using them interchangeably in terms of talking about access. But the information being presented is tending towards physical access to the space. So is that typical, or are we missing something? Are we covering all our bases? I guess is what I'm asking.
Great question. The ADA and the ADA design guidelines and the Illinois Accessibility Code are designed to address access issues for those with physical disabilities, but in addition to hearing impairments, visual impairments. So it doesn't put one before the other. They essentially put all at equal priority. The downside to the accessibility code, like other codes that architects and engineers have to design into compliance with, is that the codes are a minimum requirement. And certainly what we have heard since beginning work with OPRF is that there are students who we could have a facility that meets every single requirement of the accessibility code, and they would still not necessarily have access to all the program elements in the building. Because while a door may meet, the opening may meet all of the requirements, if they can't open that door, then, and they're able to, if they're able to, there's the part of, if a student or faculty member doesn't want someone's help, that's really I think the key piece is that then we have to look at what else we can do and provide beyond the minimum requirements of the code. And so door opening is a good example. So either putting a power door operator on a door, or look at an alternative measure where the door is magnetically held open, and then when it needs to be closed, someone has to actually come in and close the door. So I bring that up as an example that we're actually looking at relative to all the classrooms that are going to be renovated as part of Project One. So the district's construction manager is going to provide an estimate on all of the work that would need to be done to every single opening as part of the spaces that are being renovated as part of Project One, to bring them into compliance with the current accessibility code. And then also provide an estimate to put all of those doors on magnetic hold opens, so that we can present that information to the board, because it's going to be a substantial cost to bring those openings into compliance, the minimum requirements of the accessibility code, and we could do that. You could go through take all the steps necessary to do that, and it still may not achieve the access that you're looking to for your students, whereas looking at an alternative measure like the magnetic hold opens could cost less and achieve or do a better job at trying to achieve that access. So I know I apologize, it was a very long answer, but it's a complex issue, and really accessibility and access is defined by, the definition it really changes based on the needs of the occupants. And so for every facility, that's going to be different.
And do we have a sense of what our needs have been in terms of the students that we serve?
I don't feel I could respond to that accurately. I have a sense of it, but it's not backed up by, I haven't been doing this job long enough to really answer that accurately. My sense is, if I look at what we're seeing in these reports, we've got a lot of places in this building where we're not providing access. There's no other way to say it.
Well, I guess my question is the reverse, in terms of starting from a place of, the students that we currently serve, and what has been have there been issues of access, or what are the types of needs that we haven't met, whether it is because of hearing impairment or visual impairment or sensory issue? I mean, I'm thinking the whole gamut. We know who our students are?
Yeah, I would ask Dr. Walker.
And it doesn't have to be answered now. I'm just saying that when we had this in, whatever it is, in February, that be a part of it, that we have a sense of who our demographic that we're serving.
I do want to note, because your point is well made, what types of students or what disabilities or what issues of access have we had? But I do know that one of the measures, I think the board knows that's being taken in a proactive way. We're actually meeting with parents of students who have yet to come to try to make sure that we get ahead of addressing some of those issues. The difficulty, I want to go back to Josh's comment, is there will probably at some point in time be something that we're not,
Of course.
even if we do it, yeah.
Right. But that's why I said looking, not, I mean, it's good to be forward-looking, but having a sense of who we're served, or who we've served in the last 4 years, and what those issues have been, just as the same way we're looking at how many students we have, how many, you know, all those different things. And we're being intentional about understanding some of the needs as a part of that report.
I can add a little input into that. We do know. Oh, okay. Thanks. We do have a sense of the needs of many of our students currently in the programs, as well as those that are transitioning into our programs. We're actively involved with our parents, as well as our feeder schools in District 1997. Some things do come up that we don't expect. For example, the fire drills. Some students may be sensory overloaded, but we definitely, after something like that happens, then we try to put things in to accommodate the needs of those students. We know exactly, for example, if we're having a student with a physical disability coming in, what type of equipment we will need to order for instruction. The more big ticket items, we are aware of those as well, as far as, for example, the architect was saying someone may need to actually assist the student at the door. We will assign a paraprofessional. So we are very aware of what's coming and currently what we have for our students.
And yeah, I think that just as a data point, that would be helpful to have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks.
Any other questions on this slide?
Yeah, this is Craig. I have a question, and maybe it's a repeat of something that somebody said, but you know, it says in the report something along the lines of, or it says in this document that there are a number of things that we can't address because they're inherent in the school design. And I guess the question I have is, how do we make that decision? Because it's really a matter of what does it cost to change it. So help me understand how that decision is made as whether we address an issue or not.
Well, I know there's some grandfathering in. I think I'll need your help on this. Sure. I know we need your help on this.
Craig, it's a good question, and I'm trying to think of some examples within the existing facility. And I probably would have, the choice of words often, what we see is more along the lines of technically infeasible as opposed to challenges that are insurmountable given the age of a facility. And so with that, I think a good example would be where for particular learning spaces within the building that are only access, that there's an elevation change between corridor and learning environment. If there simply is not enough room to put a ramp in or a lift, then you would have an example of something that's technically infeasible. And getting a little more detail there, what I mean by that is if the ramp or the lift had to be located in the corridor to achieve that access, you would actually be creating a more serious code violation, and that would be in terms of a violation of the fire code. So we have to look at every single one of these instances on a case-by-case basis, and then bring forward potential solutions to the district to make a decision on. And Craig, does that help?
It does. I'm sort of trying to think down the road, and people and how people will challenge what we choose to do and what we choose we can't do.
Okay.
And I just want to be sure that we're
2.9. So we're gonna come with a full report in February to the board. And as I stated earlier, the good news is this capital work we're doing gives us an opportunity to right some of the design flaws of the past and to do things in such a way that accessibility is a key design consideration. So that's the good news. And obviously the report will give us an opportunity to take and build a timeline, a project timeline in terms of when some of these other areas, we should be able to prioritize on what are the areas that need the most work and how can we work that into our fiscal budget so that we are doing things in a timely manner, but still maintaining the fiscal responsibility we have. So, as I said, the report is going to be our roadmap. And one of the things that was suggested to us, and I know other districts do, and we want to really look into doing that here, is forming an advisory group to help us, a community advisory group of parents and other folks in the community to help us with these issues to determine from their perspective what would be a way to look at the prioritization of some of these items. So I think that would be helpful to have that community connection to help us go through this. Okay. I think that's it on that topic. Any questions before I move on? Sorry?
I was just saying, Dick should be missing the back. When you get to the next section, Dick should be missing the back.
Sorry. I'm terrible at hearing names.
I didn't hear either.
Okay. Okay, are we good to move on to the next section? Okay. So the next section is with respect to the Husky Pump space renovation. So let me give you some brief background on this. In the last inspection that was done for the River Forest Community Center's daycare facility in this building, there were some fire code violations that were noted in that inspection. Dick Chappelle, the director there, pointed those out to us. The team worked diligently over a significant period of time to try to figure out how we could resolve these issues. And it took us quite a while, and we looked at, I would say, every possible alternative there was to trying to figure that out. One of the things I'm going to show you right after this is the existing space. And I can tell you about 7 months ago when we were made aware of this, and we went to look at the space. It's really not a good space for the use we have of it. It has many different level changes. It's not a very safe space. Okay, so I think we have an imperative for our folks that are using our facilities to make sure that they have a very safe place to use it. Irrespective of the licensing, I mean, we actually have licensing, and we feel very strongly, unless we remediate these issues, we're pretty confident that licensing would not be granted. And the next licensing is coming up in September of 2020. So we've got a timeline on this also. So given that, we looked at a number of different solutions. We felt, we worked with our partners, FGM, and we felt the most practical and cost-effective solution would be to look at a renovation of the space. And actually the time frame of the renovation puts it really in the same time frame of this work we're describing, we talked to you about this evening, which is the 2020 summer capital improvement work, because that's really the time frame under which we have to get this done in order to make the licensing deadline of September 2020. So let me just show you, this doesn't really do it justice, but I want to give you just some idea. And Josh, I'm going to ask you if you want to chime in here.
Sure. So kind of orient you to where these photos are taken. So the photo on the upper left is those windows are would you be looking out onto Erie, and so the door to the left is essentially the main entrance to this portion of Husky Pups coming in from door 7. So immediately 6 to 7 feet in, you encounter steps down into that next space. And then the photo on the bottom right is moving further east in that space. There are steps down to a kitchenette area, changing area, office area, and then there's a ramp up to the corridor that bisects the Husky Puffs area, and it's actually the corridor that the high school students use to gain access to Auto Shop. And it's the only indoor access to Auto Shop in the building, and it happens to be a corridor that splits Husky Puffs down the middle. And it's the corridor that was the major fire code violation cited by the state fire marshal during their last inspection. And that violation is that there isn't a second exit out of the Husky Puff spaces to the south of that corridor. Those occupants would be, as a second exit, they theoretically, in an emergency, be exiting through Auto Shop, which is the code. One, does not allow exit through another space. Two, there isn't what is referred to a man door in the code in the Auto Shop area. So you'll later on, when you see the solution that we're recommending to correct that violation, that's really the most important piece to address in this in the solution for this space. And then, Mike, if you don't mind going to the next. So then on this next slide, the image on the upper left is showing the stairs that go up then to this mezzanine level. We showed you the stairs that went down to that kitchenette area, changing area, office area. The stairs that go up to this mezzanine area, and then to the left is the other room that's associated with the daycare area. And then the photo on the image on the bottom right is the mezzanine area that is used mostly for storage in that space. So there's multiple level changes throughout the space. Also, I should point out the image on the upper left, all the way on the left-hand side of that image, you can see a ship's ladder going up to the windowsill. So that is actually meant to serve as an emergency point of egress for occupants in that room. And given the age of the occupants in the daycare facility, it's reasonable to argue that that is inappropriate for the age of the occupants in that space.
Jeff, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, you went back to the last slide, you can see the ladder a little bit better. There it is right there.
And the notion is that in case of a fire, the notion is the ladder is there because in the case of a fire, the children in Husky Puffs would be charged to go out the window.
Certainly with help from the faculty that are in that area, and then the first responders. There's no. I want to make sure that that's clear that the first responders in Oak Park, they're fully aware of this. So if there was an emergency, they would go there to assist. But it still does slow down the egress of the occupants. And if there was an emergency, the greatest thing that you can do is expedite the occupants' egress to the public way. And so something like that does certainly slow it down. It's also worth noting, and something worthy of taking a look at, is that the height of the windowsills there are well above grade on Erie. And some of those exit on top of the gas house roof.
It could be worse.
Yeah. So.
How long has it been like this?
Since the program's inception.
Yeah,
You know, since we took over the program, I think this is the 13th year.
he can't hear you. That's
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you go up to the podium, the mic.
I'm Dick Chappelle.
We sound like a radio.
I'm Dick Chappelle. I'm the director for the River Forest Community Center. We've had a partnership with the high school since, I believe, 2007. And so since the time that we have taken over the program, that this has been the existing setup.
And this is the first time there's been a fire code violation?
That is correct. I think that coincides with the new fire inspector coming out.
So one other comment before we move on from that. As soon as we observed what we just talked to you about, I assigned some additional security personnel, so in any case of a drill or anything else, we've got extra people to help facilitate that. Not that they're going out a window during the drill, because they have a primary access out. But I have extra staff assigned, in the unlikely event if something actually happened, we've got the staff going there to help assist.
No.
So moving on then to the next slide, which is slide 13. Okay, so what we're proposing here is a renovation of the space. And this renovation, there was some Husky Pup movement in Project 1, but that was really just moving the infant room, sliding that to the north, correct? It had nothing to do with this space. So this is all new with respect to costing. There's nothing in Project 1 to cover this.
Excuse me. Just for clarity, while it's not in Project 1, I think it was proposed in Project 4.
Yes, it was in the fourth sequence 4 or whatever. I think that's what they were calling it. There was a redoing of the Husky space was in that sequence 4.
A relocation.
To where?
Good question. And maybe moving back to the movement of the infants room, that was identified as part of Project 1, as part of the expansion of special education. So that would move further north, and it's essentially directly underneath us. That would move further north. Husky Pups, the balance of it, where it's essentially all located between Erie and the auto shop, would move closer then to the infants room, mostly where currently science faculty offices are located. But again, as Dr. Pruitt Adams pointed out, that move from where it currently is to its final home, if you will, in sequence 4, that is pretty far down the road relative to the timeline in the master plan. And as Mike pointed out, the licensing through DCFS for the Husky Pups currently, that expiring and needing to be renewed in September of 2020 creates a bit of a challenge. And we should say that as we move to show you then the solution, we did look at, well, what would it mean to move Husky Pups out of its current area? And it actually the cost would be more significant, because then we have to relocate whoever we displace by moving Husky Pups to a different area, renovate that area for Husky Pups, and then renovate another area to move whoever's displaced by the movement of Husky Pups.
So is the proposal to renovate it in situ, sort of, and then move it again if we approve phase 4, or it would just stay there?
Stay there.
So it's going to be taken essentially out of phase 4 and not moved?
That would be our recommendation. That decision, though, would not be up to us, but rather to the district board.
But this would obviate the need for putting it again in phase 4?
Yes. So if I could just get through this, and then you just bear with me on this one slide, and I'll be happy to take any questions. So the two major costs are fixing those multiple level changes. And with the direction we gave FGM is we wanted this space fixed, period. So that if Husky Pups moved someplace else, not saying it would, but if we determine in some future time it should move someplace else, this space would be available for classrooms or anything else. As it exists in its current state, it could be used for two things, maybe one. Offices, possibly, that's questionable, but storage would be the only thing that it could be used for in its current state. So it's not like if we moved it out, that space could be usable. So I said, whatever we do, I want to make sure that we do it, it's done. We don't have to come back to the space. So the second part, so that's a big part of the cost. The second big part of the cost is fixing this egress issue. Is really getting a direct path out to the public way, if that's the right way to say it, from that building. Because the primary egress is good, but you have no secondary egress. So those are really the major components which are driving the cost, which we've estimated at $750,000. Okay, and then we've already talked about the fact that we've got a timeline of September 2020 with respect to the licensing challenge. So, Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah. Well, my question has really nothing to do with the recommendation. It's more about what the business model is. Because as I look at, I'd like to understand how this fits into our mission as a school district, and looking at the data that was shared. Please correct me, but I was always under the impression that Husky Pups, that one of the primary purposes was for our students that had children, and we've had 0 for a few years. So it's a daycare that we're running, and so what's the business model that we have that we're, needing to afford $750,000 for, and how should that come out of the resources that we're trying to put towards our educating our students? So I'd like to understand the business model currently, because I was a bit, I don't know what the business model is in detail, and I was a bit surprised by the data.
There are approximately 64. The exact
I
number.
have it here in front of me.
Okay.
This question I would ask procedurally, do we want to answer that now, or do we want to go through and finish up? We have a few, what's remaining is really the proposed design. If we don't want to see that, we want to address your question, I'm happy to do that. I just want to know.
Okay, go ahead and finish.
Okay. So, this is, so the solution we're looking at here, I'm now, Craig, I'm on page 14. You can, and maybe you do it better than I do, so why don't you describe what we're looking at here?
So this rendering shows the north end of the school, Erie, and door 7 in essentially the closer to the background, and then actually where Mike, you just actually have the hand over what we're proposing as walls making up. Sorry, it's okay. Making up the new ramp and then stairs. So that would provide access to an ingress point into the Husky Pups area, but then also act as that second means of egress from the Husky Pups area within the building. And the idea being, if you could go to the next rendering, so this shows another view to that new stair and ramp. The idea being that parents queue up on that space that's carved out along the sidewalk with their vehicles, and so they could continue to queue up in that area and then bring their child or children into directly into the Husky Pups area through this new door. That's being put in place, yes, to meet the fire code violation, but it also does serve a dual purposes, providing a second means of ingress into the daycare facility. And then here's more of an aerial view showing that new ramp and stair.
That's the last one.
Okay. And so that's, so certainly the ramp and the stair account for a large portion of that recommendation for the total budget. But the work on the inside of the building to remove the mezzanine and then bring all of the floor levels to the same level as the corridor that you enter in door 7.
So that's really it, so now we can address Tom's question. Dick, did you want to speak to that in any way?
As far as,
Maybe some of the numbers, talk through the...
was the handout presented to the board?
I gave them last year since I didn't have yours at the time.
Okay.
You put... Okay. Okay. So go with what you have, what you sent us.
Okay, the spreadsheet that I presented has numbers that are current for this current school year. And one of the things, if you look at it, between the Oak Park River Forest High School D200 staff, participants who work in either D97 or D90, or our Oak Park River Forest residents make up 100% of our participants. Originally, Tom, yes, it was created to provide opportunities to keep the students in school. And I think that if you look at the historical perspective, there have been some numbers where we've had some, where we've had more students participating. It's not a bad thing not to have them.
Thank you, Dave.
I feel compelled to also respond. And I hear you about our role in educating students, about how our data looked. One of the reasons we wanted to bring this to the board, because we realize where we are in terms of performance, and we realize where we are in terms of finances. However, we also know that as a board, we vowed commitment to also early education, and part of being part of the collaboration for early childhood. And as an administration, looking at that commitment, wanted to bring this to the board as our recommendation. We do understand at the end of the day, it's the board's decision. But in looking at the commitment we've said to early childhood, though, we would be remiss if we did not bring this to the board.
So let me ask a question on that. So the student, the children that are placed in Husky Pups, is this a free model, or is this a revenue generating model of some sort?
It is a revenue generating model, and the money goes to River Forest. And we've had a conversation, a cursory conversation with Mr. Chappelle about, once we get some insight from the board, is if it's even something we should consider asking would the River Forest trustees be also willing to pay some of the money towards the renovation.
So my ask would be to understand the business model. I mean, we don't need to discuss it today, but what is it? Because as I see it, one, we have a daycare for our staff, which is a benefit, but it's that, call it what it is. It also looks like a daycare for community residents. So we need to understand the business model, and then we can then we can have a discussion from my perspective.
I have a question just for clarity. So the fire code violations, just like, I feel like this seems very out of the blue. Like, to me, it seems like something that would have been known for longer than just finding out that these violations exist and that this change has to be happened by next year. So if these changes aren't made, then this program would no longer be able to exist inside the building. Is that correct?
Yes.
We don't have a 100% certainty, but it's probably 99%.
I don't know that I would say inside the building. I would say in its current location, in its current configuration, because while that fire marshal may no longer be with the office, the fire marshal who comes out next is likely going to have that inspection report with them, and it would certainly be a unique situation if they didn't look upon the most recent inspection report and say that those violations no longer needed to be addressed.
So in the presentation, it says that the most practical and cost-effective solution is to include this renovation, but we didn't really see the cost implications of moving it to another location or other options within the building other than doing this $750,000 renovation.
I think without giving the cost, Josh did indicate that it would be more costly than the $750 to move them to where their proposed site is in sequence 4, because we'd have to move the people who are currently there and renovate a space for them, and then renovate that space for the Husky Pups, and it would exceed the $750. That's my understanding. We don't have the actual cost, we could probably give you an estimated cost.
I would even say it more strongly. I don't think it's even possible from a timeline point of view. 2 reasons. One, you don't have any swing space. I mean, part of what's driving us to build the SRC first is to give us that space to move other places out, so we can rebuild classrooms in another area. So I would say that we did an analysis on our utilization of classrooms, and that's been factored into the classrooms that will be lost by knocking down the staff cafeteria. So I think even if money was not an option at all, the timeline, given the amount of time we have actually to design and do this work, I don't think it's feasible to do it.
When we do the construction for the SRC piece, would this have already been impacted? Would this have been a space that might have been hit by any of that
No,
construction?
not at
It
all.
would not at all?
Not at all, not at all. It's totally new.
Totally new.
So I have three different questions. One, would this come out of life safety?
Could the,
Was it be that?
well, it's complicated in that because you're not using the space for your students. As I sit here now, I'm unsure as how ISB would weigh in on that. Could the district submit a health, life, safety amendment for this area? Yes. Would the State Board of Education approve that health and safety amendment to then use fire prevention safety funds to address these violations? Maybe. But keep in mind, the fire prevention safety funds, those are funds that don't come from the state, that's from those are your funds.
It's another pot.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, I have more than 3 questions, I think. So off of that question, in terms of River Forest Community Center, do they have any access to any such funds are there public funds that could be used to make these changes? Because just because it's in our building doesn't mean that it's our sole responsibility, given that we're not the ones who run the program, right? I mean, I'm assuming that conversation hasn't occurred.
Well, we did, as Dr. Cordet mentioned, we did start the conversation with Mr. Chappelle about the possibility of some arrangement with River Forest on their participation in the funding.
And so who pays for the employees for that program? Are they River Forest Community Center employees, or are they district employees?
River Forest Community Center employees.
So I'm just wondering about liability for us. I mean, if there, heaven forbid, were to be some emergency, how does the liability run then? It's our liability though, right? Because it's in our space?
I don't know enough about liability to comment on that.
I mean, I'm wondering if we should even have this facility running right now, right? I mean, it seems like these violations are pretty major, and I'm a little frustrated that our fire inspector didn't tell us until now, it sounds like.
7 months ago, right?
Well,
Until
that's
this year, I
that's
should
really
say.
when we started working in earnest on it, yes.
So what does that mean? When did we find out?
I don't have the exact date that we found out. I know when I became aware of it is when we really started working it hard to just figure out what was going on.
And that was 7 months ago?
Yeah, approximately, yeah. It was the end of the school year, right before summer break. And I think the expectation was that there was an ability to not, we didn't think we were going to have to move heaven and earth to make this work. And until we got the engagement of our architect and they really started digging into it, and every direction we turned in was a brick wall, no pun intended. that's when we really realized that it would take a major renovation to fix this.
And I should say, as to why previous inspections by the Office of the State Fire Marshal did not cite this is, we would have to call in every single one of those fire marshals to ask them why. And
Well, I think we're learning more about this whole enterprise beyond the violations. So Janet, you had a question?
Well, it actually, I think it kind of goes with understanding the business model question, because what if we decide not to do this? What happens then? There's no longer this, so if neither option seems feasible, right, spending that amount or spending any amount to move it, and there's a determination just not to have it, are there already contractual obligations between the high school and the community center? What happens with, the pieces that are already set up? What happens to those kids that are in that program? I mean, like, there are like layers of pieces that I feel affect the decision-making on this that would be really beneficial to them.
So what I'm going to say could be kind of hypothetical. I don't know how to put it on. There's some potential dominoes. So if we decide not to do it here, the potential, we have another year, I believe, on our agreement. It was historically 3 years, and several years ago we made it 4, with the option of if a person got out of it, we had to give a year's notice, I believe it said. If it's not housed here, and the River Forest Community Center decides that they want to continue the program for those who use it, there could be a potential impact on us because our site program is housed there. They may need that space back, is what I'm saying.
Because our which program is
Our
housed?
site, we have site 1 and site 2.
I can talk to that a little bit. We have our transition program for our students 18 to age 22 housed at the River Forest Community Center. And it's been a reciprocal agreement with the River Forest Community Center since probably 2006 or 2007, I think we started there with 1 classroom. Now we're up to 2 classrooms.
And I'm not saying that will happen, I'm just saying that's a potential. You asked what would possibly.
Well, I think that, if there's an expectation that we're going to make a decision about this, I think we need all of that information to make that decision.
And we do realize that we're not asking to make a decision now anyway. We felt that it was imperative that we bring this information forward,
Right.
so that we realize that there's still some research we have to do. But we wanted to just put it in front of the board at this point. But we're not asking you to make a decision right now.
But a decision will need to be made, so that's why I feel like giving us part of the information, not all of the information, even at the outset, feels a little bit stunting in our decision-making process. So I would just love for us to have more. Like you mentioned, that there's more information coming, but in the future, I think if there's some big thing like this, like we get as much information up front as possible, it'd be great. I feel like 7 months is a good amount of time to know something for us to just be hearing about it as well. That feels a little bit,
Yes.
I'm challenged by that.
So I would agree with Gina that we really need the business model information to make a decision. In particular, understand what it would mean to not house it at our school, because, we're arguing over a pretty significant chunk of change to make these modifications, and there might be some better solutions. If we were so committed to the program, they might not just be within our walls.
I have one other, the categories, we have staff, District 9790, TAP students, OP, or River Forest residents, and other. Who's other? Because we have 7 others.
That was last year. I'm sorry. Last year, we had some people that came from outside of the communities. That maybe they possibly may have worked at the universities. So they were not River Forest or Oak Park residents.
So we don't have any this year, but we could have some next year.
Correct, there could be.
So I would also ask for what our enrollment policy for this is to understand. I have had a completely wrong impression of what Husky Hopes is. So,
Ditto.
yeah. Yeah. So this is, there's a lot of information needed. And it is also, you know, there is some urgency because if you're talking about September of next year, that's less than a year away. So we need some idea of when a decision needs to be made. And if there's a way to do a postmortem on this to understand how it took this long for this to come before the board, even as an issue of a fire hazard. And, you know, everything you all just said, even if another fire marshal came in, we can't unhear what we heard.
Right.
So it's not as though we'd say, oh, well, you know, this new one says it's not a work.
It's an issue.
It's an issue, and it's been an issue for a long time, and it's concerning that, I don't know, we got, as much as we're saying this is just preliminary, there's an urgency to make a decision. So all the information required, as well as when a decision needs to be made. And I would also say the various options of in two areas. One, different locations, or what happens if we no longer do this program. And the other part is, if we're spending $750,000 here, then where does it come out somewhere else? That's the other piece of this that, in my mind, is part of the, it's not an add-on, it is instead of something.
So the last slide I have, slide 15, is just what's upcoming. And as I mentioned, January we'll give you a budget update. In February we'll give you the accessibility report, and we'll probably give you an update on any new operational impacts that come up. I'm good? Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the presentation of the fiscal year 2019 audit report and comprehensive annual financial report. As the board knows, Baker Tilly is the audit firm that's been working with us. They prepared the fiscal year 2019 report, and they're ready to present it tonight. This is in compliance with strategic plan priority 4, operations, facility, finance, and board policy 4:10, 4:20. It is our request that after this presentation, that we move forward with the annual financial report and the audit for acceptance at the December 19th Board of Education meeting.
And to spice it up, we're going to do responsive reading of the 192 pages.
Each take paragraph?
Each take a few pages at a time.
You start. So, I'd like to welcome Joe Lightcap from our partner with Baker Tilly, who actually comes in and goes over our audit with you guys. I have to say this year, this audit went very smooth. It was nice to actually go through this audit. I think it worked very well. I have to give a lot of credit to Alyssa Varno because she did an outstanding job of tracking everybody, getting everything done, getting the journal entry pages ready and everything. So I do have to give her a lot of credit for this. I'm going to just let Joe speak to our audit, and if you guys have any questions, just let us know.
Definitely echo the sentiments about Alyssa and her efforts, and Cindy as well, and the rest of her team. It was a much smoother audit than it's been the last couple of years, in large parts to their efforts. So there's two reports that I'll be going over tonight. very briefly, but obviously the more detail you want to go into, we can. The first is the comprehensive annual financial report, 190-page document I referenced a minute ago, which, as the name suggests, is comprehensive. It's more than what is required by minimum accounting standards. It gives a little bit more transparency to your financial information. Some more narratives in the front, in the transmittal letter, and then some 10-year historical information in the back. That's kind of additional to what would be normally required. I'm going to start, the other report is the communication to those charged with governance and management. It's kind of our non-financial highlights. But I will start with the comprehensive annual financial report. And on page 1, which is the page numbers at the bottom, obviously not the PDF page numbers that you have, is our independent auditor's report. And once again, we issued a clean or unmodified opinion on the district's financial statements. It's the highest level of assurance you can gain from your outside auditor, and it states that everything is reasonable in all material respects and can be reasonably relied upon by an outside user. There were no new accounting policies adopted by the district this year. So the layout of financial statements, kind of how it's presented and the disclosures will be pretty consistent from the prior year. While the numbers change and some of the different information changes, there's no drastic changes like we've seen in years past. I wanted to point out real quick on page 4, the management's discussion and analysis. This is a section of the report written by management that is the high-level overview of what happened with the district's finances compared to the prior year. So just the highlights of the year, kind of the financial numbers and a little bit of the narrative of why the changes occurred. I'll skip over that. That's the easiest read of the report, so we'll kind of get into a little more of the not so easy reads. Page 11, this is the only time you'll see this during the year. What this schedule is, the statement of net position, this has all of the assets, all of the liabilities of the district, and all of the funds in one column. So you can see the total assets of the district at a little over $217 million, total liabilities a little over $73 million, and the fallout of that, the ending net position is at $130 million. The second, the page 12, which is the statement of activities, is kind of the income statement for all of your funds together. I'll let Cindy catch up. I know we get there. So the change in net position was a little under $500,000 of a decrease from the prior year. We started out at $130,500,000 last year, and then just over $130 million, like I just mentioned. So overall, when we look at all the funds and all the assets and liabilities, you kind of look for trends, increasing or decreasing. I would say it's relatively flat from the prior year when we're talking about such large dollars. Something that would be a little bit more familiar is on the next page, 13, next 2 pages, 13 and 14. This is the governmental funds balance sheet. So this is the assets, liabilities, and fund balance for the district's funds. This is more of a short-term perspective. It doesn't have all capital assets or long-term debt. It's just got short-term receivables, short-term payables. Kind of really gives you that short-term perspective of the district's finances, where you're at June 30th, 2019, with a comparison on the right column to 2018. Skipping over a couple pages to pages 16 and 17. This is the income statement by funds. I'll spend a little bit more time on this page. But on page 17, you can see towards the bottom that this is the total for 2019, all funds combined, outside of the internal service funds. The fund balance has increased by $3.2 million from the prior year. And then we look at the operating funds, which is what we would consider general operations and maintenance, transportation, and IMRF. Even after the $21 million of transfers out to the capital projects fund, your expenditures to fund balance was about 12 months of operating funds. So it's still, fund balances that, even with the $20 million transfers out, still good fund balances. to meet your operating expenditures. Now, what, the district's plan for that going into the future is how you judge whether or not that's adequate or not. Expenditures, when you look at them compared to the prior year, they increased about $167,000, or 0.2%. But if you remove the debt service, then, so we don't consider debt service, expenditures went up about $1 million, or a little over 1.4%. So that's the different funds and the financial impacts. After that, there's some good information on the internal service funds, so the insurance funds, and the agency funds, so the student activity accounts. Then there's a lot of good detail on the notes of the financial statements, which goes over all the district's accounting policies and kind of changes in certain assets and liabilities from the prior year. Just a lot better, more information to help you understand what happened during the year. I want to kind of skip over the details, and I want to point you out to the required supplementary information. Go too far. It's page 52. This begins some of the more financial information with some good comparisons to prior year. This section starts off with the changes, or the net pension liability for IMRF, TRS, and we get into the other post-employment benefit changes for the district's standalone plan and the teacher's health insurance security fund. So you can see this just kind of gives you, these are long-term liabilities, and they're very variable. There's a lot of different inputs that go into these actuarial assumptions that change, and some of them aren't even, you have limited impact on what you can do. Some especially at the state level for TRS, where there's an IMRF, there's actuaries that come up with those assumptions of what they think is going to happen in the future, how long people are going to live, how long people are going to work, the potential salaries for these employees. One thing I did want to point out on the IMRF fund on 52, the net pension liability was $1.2 million in 2018 and jumped up to about $9.4 million in 2019. So when we look at this is 6/30, your financial information for 6/30/19, but it's IMRF reporting at 12/31/18. And the fourth quarter of 18 was very bad for the stock market, so the investment returns were very much reduced, and a loss actually from in that fourth quarter really drove down the whole year, the whole valuation at 12/31/18. Now that did rebound in the first quarter of 2019, which is not reflected here, but we'll see that going forward. But also as kind of, not in response to that, but in response to that and other things that IMRF saw, they also changed assumptions and reduced the discount rate from 7.5% to 7.25%. I'm sure you got a notice from them about an increasing in the rates, not as significant as this looks. I'm sure the rate was up without knowing it, seeing other clients, the rate went up maybe a fraction of a percentage point versus the $8 million increase that you see here. So while it's just a jump in time that can change, that IMRF especially is good at looking out in the future and kind of adjusting, doing small tweaks here and there to make sure that it stays economically viable. After the kind of the trend information on these liabilities, you get into the budget to actual schedules. We'll look at just the general fund. On page 58, revenues were over budget by $183,000. And then on expenditures, on page 65, the expenditures were under budget by about $466,000. So all in all, revenues were over budget, kind of conservative, in both aspects. So it's kind of good to see. And I kind of looked through all the different funds, just preparing, obviously outside of the audit. But we look at what the district budgeted for changes in fund balances compared to what actually happened. They're all generally pretty good in that regard. Comparing what was expected to happen and what did happen. Those were my prepared comments on financial information CAFR. I'd be happy to take questions on that before we move down to the other report.
Questions?
presentation, I think you answered one of the questions, which was related to page 52, and you said that the timing of this is calendar year?
Because IMRF covers so many different fiscal year ends of the employers, they pick one period of time to value one fiscal year end, and their fiscal year is 12/31. So you use 12/31 as the date to put your liability on the statement of that position, and any contributions you have after that, the 6 months, are taken out of the income statement, because it's not to kind of value you back to 12/31.
Good. Page 54, which is the pension liability. So I had asked some questions on that, which is, it shows the overall liability jumping to $320 million. And so if today the pension liability were to shift to this district, what's the significance of that number in its entirety? I mean, they're going to phase in, but what's the significance of that number as it relates to that discussion?
Depending on what the state did from 0 to 100%, that would potentially come on to the books of the district and be a liability that you would have to pay off over time. I don't know that what's been presented to the state, it's not that worst case scenario, but they also haven't decided what they want, if they want to do anything at all. So it would increase the costs and potentially put more long-term liability on your statement of that position. Because currently, the only number from the schedule, the number on your financial statements is the $4.6 million, the district's proportionate share.
So that's the risk to us of that change. And that number has doubled in the last 5 years. Because of?
There's a variety of reasons, from the actuarial assumptions used to the performance of the plan, the lack or funding by the state. There's so many different variables to why that would occur. And also that relates to your percentage of contributions, or your salaries compared to other districts and what they are. And that changes year over year. It can fluctuate. It can be a big fluctuation for the total liability there as well. One other thing that the state did this year is they took the federal contribution piece out of the calculation, out of your allocation. So that kind of put a big fluctuation compared to other districts in the state.
And also on that page is, you had mentioned about the actuarial assumptions changing. So in this case, there's evidence through the course of the time of those assumptions changing, both in a number of areas, the discount rate one, but even the projected salary. So what drives that, and what input do we have in that?
The only input I would see is that you're one piece of the overall salaries in the states, and what the actuary is looking at as salary increases that they are seeing, and what the state is seeing across the state. It's not directly, they don't come out and ask you what they are, it's just what they're seeing in their studies. So the entire state, what they think they see, is trying to put into the one valuation, your allocated.
Okay. That's kind of a dark cloud. I mean, it's a big number. It's real, it's on a piece of paper. My last question, just to jump back, and this goes back to page IV. which is this is about us. So my question is, as we look at the top line of salary increases, was fiscal 2017 a 0.04%, or was it 0.4?
0.4. It
Okay.
needs to be corrected, and also.
I'm on record, this is year 3 in a row,
Yep.
so we can't get that one right. And then also, the footnote references steps through 2017, and that needs to be 2018 to correspond with the schedule, because it's out of whack. So that needs to be fixed. I yield the floor to the senator from Massachusetts.
Actually, Tom, your comments about the pension on page 54, I just wanted to echo that a bit as well, because that is a big number, and this idea of the pension cost shift and what could potentially hit us is such a huge conversation. I know that, like, statewide, the conversation that we're having is really to do everything that we can to ensure that that does not hit districts, right? Like, because there are districts that would be decimated by that shift. And seeing our numbers, right, and knowing what we're looking at as well, like how would that truly impact us? It's a much larger conversation, but it just drives home the point of the importance of our legislators doing what needs to be done in order to ensure that that pension cost shift doesn't hit us at the district level. Well, considering we didn't create that mess, I'm just saying.
But I mean, we control our own pensions and inputs into it, so I don't know. I mean,
Well, I do understand that, but we don't have control over the pension. If the pension cost shift happens, that's not something that, like, then we're hit with a much larger decision. Right. So absolutely in keeping with the control that we can for our purview, but that big piece, like you mentioned, is a real looming dark cloud.
yeah, I mean, I think we need to manage what we impact and protect ourselves.
Yeah, right, of course.
Craig?
Yeah?
You're supposed to read pages 172. Do you have any questions?
I don't have any additional questions, Tom.
Okay.
Then I'll briefly go over the communication rules, charge of governance and management. These are the non-financial highlights of our audit. A rosier picture than the state's pension troubles. The first piece of this report, it satisfies a few different auditing standards. The first one is a report on internal control. We come out and we look at the district's internal control over significant transaction cycles, not to provide an opinion on internal controls, but to determine the nature, timing, and extent of our audit procedures. So if there's a riskier area, we'll spend more time. We'll look at it and we'll hit it a little bit harder. If there are deficiencies in internal control that we feel the board should know about, they would be in here as a significant deficiency. If we think that it's a control weakness that could potentially cause a material misstatement of financial statements, then that would be a material weakness in here. If you were to compare this report to last year, it's a much better report. I think we talked about it last year, how some good positive changes that went into effect in the middle of the year would most likely help improve the letter when all the controls are in place for the entire year. And that's exactly what we saw. So we're left with one comment that we felt was that the board should be told about, and that's an issue, a comment over payroll. The comment looks like what it looked like last year, but I think even this one there's been improvement on it, and I think there's even more improvement to go at the district level. So potentially even better improvement in this letter to come. And now that's not to say that we could do other procedures or something might happen in the future, or there may be transitions and business office or things like that, and other things could pop up. But as we sit right now, it's the comment piece of this is moving in the right direction, and great to see from our perspective.
Okay, so what the raises are, payroll person has the ability to change the contract and also put in a rate, which at one point, because she was putting in timesheets, she would have to also put in rates. So what's happened with that is she no longer will be able to, she can see contracts, but she cannot go in and change a rate or put in rates or put in timesheets. It's all goes through HR, everything goes through there, and it's fed into the payroll system now. Because payroll moved back to the business department, we had to section that off.
When was that change formalized as it relates to this audit period, and so when will we see it roll off?
It should roll off for next year, because that was, when that was brought up, it was last month, and we, that's when we put the stop from her being able to see both of those. Or not see, but actually input and change.
The next piece of this letter is the two-way communication regarding your audit, starting on page 3. This is more of a forward-looking document. It's more planning for next year's audit. What it talks about is some basic concepts of our audit. The important part that I see is that we work for the board. We work with management to the audit, but we ultimately work for the board. If there's ever any questions, concerns at the board level that you would think you'd like us to look into a little more deeply, or just questions you want to bounce off of us, we're available at any time to answer those in terms of the audit or throughout the year. The next piece of the document is some kind of informational points. This year, we have page 6 is about departmental controls. Kind of what this boils down to is what I mentioned earlier about internal controls. We look at significant transaction cycles. There's a lot of other transaction cycles within the district that may not have a material impact on your financial status, but places where the district should have internal controls and things to kind of keep in mind there. It's just more of a, like I said, an informational point. Starting at page 7, there's a few new accounting standards that the district will have to implement over the next couple of years. One being the lease standard, which is a couple of years out, where operating leases will have to come on, if material will have to come on to the financial statements. And then something a little more impactful for next year is the fiduciary standard, where the student activity funds, if they're ultimately under the control of the board, so there's a teacher or the business office reviewing and approving expenditures, those will more likely than not become district funds. And we're still in discussion with ISD on exactly what they want it in your financial report, but my guess it would be some sort of function within the general fund, the educational fund. So you would see, right now it's just an assets and liabilities, what do we hold, what for other people. It's more district money at that point, and we would see the flows as well, so we would see revenues and expenditures of those accounts. Other than that, there's a few other accounting standards that'll come down for the district that they may or may not be applicable. And the final piece of this report is kind of just if there were disagreements with management, if there's troubles performing the audit, things like that, they would be listed out here. There's a lot of no on here where the audit went well. So it's pretty much a standard stock letter, which is good to see from my perspective, I would say. So outside of that, those are kind of my prepared comments on that report, unless there's any questions, any further questions on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hanging in there.
Time flies when you're up here.
The next item is the Valor Technologies abatement contract for 2020 capital improvement projects. Making this presentation is Jeff Bergman, Fred Cruz, and Mike Carioso. We did the open bid, as you heard earlier, on November the 21st. After the presentation, we're recommending that this item be moved forward for the December 19th Board of Education meeting on a contract in the amount of $91,540 for asbestos abatement services. This is in compliance with Strategic Plan Priority 4 and District Policy 4:60 and 4:150.
Can you talk a little more?
Sure I can, let's see. Attached, you'll find the contract and supporting documentation with Valor Technologies for the upcoming 2020 summer capital improvement construction project. You'll see the PICRON letter of recommendation for Valor Technologies, and you will see the Valor Technology signed contract.
Jeff?
Okay, I would just like to point out that this, the contract that we're presenting is for the capital improvements for the summer of 2020. It does not reflect any of the work for the Project 1. So this is just summer work for 2020. It is, as noted, it is a little bit higher than it has been in the previous years. We have had previous years that have been this high, and that's due to the extent of work that we're doing. Some of that is due to the report that we got on the roof and the condition of the roof and a lot of the issues that we've had in the past with it. So we've moved some of that work forward. So a lot of that is going to happen on the north end of the building. There's also an alternate that we took this year, which has to do with the roof that is over the top of the auditorium stage area, which has been leaking for years. And incorporated with that, there's a little bit of a mechanical fix to the chillers that needs to happen. So that's a big piece of the work. The most expensive part of the work is happening in the One West gym over the summer, and that is in the ceiling area. We're going to replace the mechanical equipment up there. It's 28 feet in the air, and a lot of that piping and ductwork is associated with this work, and it is unfortunately wrapped with asbestos material. Due to the fact that it's elevated so high up in the air, the containment process is a little bit more involved, and that is probably the biggest piece of the work, dollar-wise, and time-wise for that matter. So that kind of rounds out what's happening with the actual portion of the work. There's several other things that are happening. There are some, like I said, there are some air handlers that we're working on. There's a combat vault out on the west side of the building that we're going to be rebuilding, the staircase and some of the components on the inside of that vault. There's asbestos work that has to happen there as well. So if there are any other questions that you would like to ask about that, or I'd like to answer them.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, a couple questions. So, other than they were low bidder, why was this firm selected?
Other than being a low bidder, why was Valor selected?
They are recommended by PECRON Environmental. PECRON in November we went out for bids, and at that time Valor was the lowest bidder, and they did I should say PECRON Environmental did a scope review of the work presented, and they are qualified to handle the work. Valor has been in the building on several occasions in the past for us, and they've done a great job and always been able to meet the schedule and the timelines that we've requested.
And how many people bid on the project other than Valor?
Yes, there were, I think, a total of 3 bids that came in.
Did you hear that, Craig? There were 3 bids that came in.
I heard that, thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next, I'll turn it over to you for future agenda items. I do want to note that for next week's meeting, one of the board goals is to develop a framework and metrics for the racial equity policy. So that's on the agenda, which was a future agenda item, and then in January, we're coming forward with the future agenda item on the policy committee framework.
Any others?
I have one, which I don't, this discussion of a fire safety violation, so that the question becomes, what are the incidents that need to be reported to the board in a timely manner? And
Defining timely.
defining timely and covering incidents, maybe, I don't know, I think it might come out of that post-mortem, but that one just raises itself in my mind.
All right.
That concludes all the items.
I move we adjourn.